I am Sarah Therese Cowan. Sarah, after my great-great-grandmother, and Therese, after my mother. Proud great-granddaughter of a war hero. However, I could just as accurately introduce myself as Sarah, great-granddaughter of a broken man. My family are very important to me. I shared a very special relationship with my great-grandmother. Unfortunately, I never met my great-grandfather. He died in 1986. Before I could know him or learn his story. A story shaped by 3 years as a private in the 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force and the few short months he spent on the slopes at Casino. His story is not a story of battlefield bravery, but the story of a very average, very ordinary man, changed forever by war. A story I learnt just last year, and one that I feel compelled to keep telling. His is not an easy story to tell. You see, from the time when Pop arrived home in 1945 until his death in 1986, he did not speak to anybody about his years at war. Not one word. My great-grandmother had been considered lucky. Pop had come home, hadn't he? But you see, the man that arrived home from Italy was not the man she had farewelled at the train station 3 years previously. He was just a little bit broken. Not physically, although he was now quite deaf from a shell that had exploded nearby, killing his best friend. But emotionally and psychologically. Shut down. Silent. It was as if what he had seen, what he had heard, and what he had done had never really happened, if no mention was made of it. Pop's silence continued over the years, broken only when he woke engulfed by one of the many night terrors that haunted him, or when he would cry out incoherently to his lost mates, caught up in the delirium of the recurrent attacks of malaria that plagued him on his return home. Nan was complicit in this cloak of silence too. She had her own story. For one thing my family could tell me about the war was that Pop was not the first love Nan had waved off to fight for king and country. Her childhood sweetheart, losing his life in the skies over Britain while serving with the RNZAF. I was sad that my precious Noni had borne this huge sorrow, stoically, strongly, and silently. And that growing up, I had been cocooned and protected from this terrible cost that my great-grandparents' generation had paid for the freedoms that I enjoy today. Their silent strength replicated in thousands of households throughout New Zealand. A collective national cloak of silence, insulating my generation from the sacrifice made by every member of every Kiwi family during the war years. I do believe that my generation are beginning to understand and honour the sacrifice made by our returned servicemen and women at dawn services, keen to keep their stories alive. Many of us march proudly with our forebears' service medals pinned to the right sides of our chests, falling in as the sun rises, and marching solemnly behind the diminishing ranks of heroes who served, sacrificed, and returned, in remembrance of those who did not. As children of a digital multimedia age, we have access to volumes of historical data at the push of a Google button. War condensed into sanitized columns of statistics. We get the cold, clinical macro mechanics of war. But what I believe my generation does not get is war at a micro level, a family level. The social cost of war to a whole generation. I accept. Some lost more than others. But all were changed. All have a story. All paid a price of some sort. Just like my nan and my pop. The thing is, many of those who lived through the war years are members of our aged communities now. In a few short years, their stories may no longer have a voice. They may be the elderly neighbour, widowed when her husband was picked off by a sniper in the jungles of Vella La Vella, or the old man in the wheelchair who speaks too loudly in the supermarket, deafened by the incessant chatter of the machine gun that he manned at Al Alamein, or a war orphan, now themselves a parent, who rose above their own personal tragedy and forged a happy and successful life, a New Zealand life, for both themselves and their families. You just wouldn't know. You couldn't imagine what the eyes of this generation have witnessed and what part of their self, spirit, or soul lies bleeding and broken in their memories of war. We owe these everyday war heroes a debt of respect, a debt best honoured by remembering their stories. I am Sarah Therese Cowan. I am the voice of my great-grandparents' stories. Whose stories will you tell? Thank you.